Good evening, I'm Bev Turner, standing in for the one and only Neil Oliver on GBNews TV, radio and online. Coming up on the show tonight, with Labour back in power, are you as scared as I am about seeing Tony Blair exerting influence centre stage? What is he up to? And did the public vote for Starmer without knowing that they were getting Blair? We're going to be debating the divisive VAT on private school fees as well as that. Now, I'm also going to be joined by an incredible man who's about to undertake one of the world's most extreme adventures. Ash Dykes is heading to the Amazon rainforest to explore one of the most remote and dangerous parts of the world. And ahead of that match, Euro 2024, the final between England and Spain in Berlin, I'm going to be asking, are the three Lions about to lift their first major silverware since 1966? Welcome to Neil Oliver's show with me, Bev Turner, while Neil is on holiday. So our first topic this evening, former Prime Minister Sir Tony Blair, and whether his influence is set to rise under this new Labour government. Blair's already been in the headlines this week, suggesting that Labour will have to raise taxes by more than £50 billion if they cannot increase productivity, and also asking Britain to embrace, you guessed it, digital ID. So is this a welcome return to the spotlight for a respected former leader, or a very unwelcome blast from the past? Well, joining me to discuss this from Navarro Media, Aaron Bastani, and the political commentator Dominique Samuels. Evening to you both. Let's start with you, Aaron. You're a left-leaning commentator. You should be presumably delighted to see Tony Blair back in the picture.
Not especially, but the biggest story for me with Tony Blair and the Tony Blair Institute really is the money. So the big problem for me is not necessarily Tony Blair. The big problem is that you have people like Larry Ellison, who's the co-founder of a massive company called Oracle, having given the Tony Blair Institute hundreds of millions of dollars. He's given 100 million, he's going to give another $200 million. And his big thing is health data, AI. And what was Tony Blair talking about this week? AI and data and the NHS. So I think it's important to separate the man from this idea of money in politics and people buying influence and pay to play in politics. We can talk about think tanks and we can talk about lobbyists in British politics. There has never been anything like the Tony Blair Institute when it comes to its scale. Now,
Tony Blair would say my institute is a not-for-profit organisation. Aaron, somehow he's making money. I think he's worth about 60 million quid at least. That's what it will say online. He's certainly the most wealthy former Prime Minister. Should we be worried about that sort of conflict of interest, Dominique? Should there be more transparency about how Tony Blair might profit from some of the ideas that he's proposing?
Well, I think it's clear how he's profited anyway. He's still being given such a persuading voice in UK politics. And to be honest, I don't know why anyone would be surprised that Tony Blair still has influence and will have influence, particularly on this government, because the general direction that we are seeing policy and that we are seeing politics is towards more control through digitalization, through AI, and through things like digital IDs, and things like health passports, which will be another thing that will crop up. Keir Starmer's government is simply more of a palatable face to actually push those agendas forward. So whether or not people like Tony Blair are put at the forefront of these kinds of policies, these decisions have already been made as far as I'm concerned. And did Tony Blair really ever leave government? Because we're still debating over the same issues, and yet policy is still going in one direction, and one that I believe is about more state control. And Tony Blair's even alluded to that, saying that Keir Starmer essentially needs to be more of a CEO, which essentially means he needs to stop listening to people, which I think is a very dangerous comment to make when, we're supposed to be apparently a democracy.
Two interesting points, actually, Aaron, to pick apart there a little bit is, does Keir Starmer know that he is there to enact the will of Tony Blair, I guess, is question one. But also question two, I guess, when we talk about this centralisation and this control via digital and technical means, will people not want that? Because there will be some people who really want the state to make decisions for them and not let them have to make those decisions for themselves about, say, their health and what medication they should take.
It's an interesting one. There are many policies which I could go either way on. It depends who's in charge and what they want to do with it. So, for instance, take North Sea oil. I'm opposed to drilling oil and gas in the North Sea. Why? Well, under the Tories, I think they probably would have just wasted it on a bunch of stuff. They probably would have given some tax cuts to some people who I don't necessarily think deserve tax cuts. You could make an argument, say, well, we should be like Norway, invest all of that in renewable technology, housing infrastructure. Those are two separate arguments, and it's very similar with data in the NHS. Personally, I don't trust government in this country to deal with that kind of data in that kind of way. It will be sold on to third parties. Importantly, though, private businesses already have huge, massive amounts of data on all of us. Amazon, Facebook, Google, the supermarket companies, the credit card companies. So I can understand the argument for giving data to the state to help us achieve certain things, but I simply don't trust people like Tony Blair, people like Larry Ellison, to use that in a responsible way. And the key here for me is history and precedent. Some people watching and listening may remember the NHS IT upgrades that we saw in the late 1990s throughout the 2000s. That cost £12 billion, money wasted. Campaign groups in 2011 came together, looked at that, and they said, Tony Blair wasn't being malicious. He simply believed everything that the likes of Bill Gates were telling him in terms of what these upgrades would mean for the NHS and service delivery. He wasn't sceptical. And I think the exact same thing is happening now with regards to data and AI.
Maybe he's learnt, Dominique, maybe Tony Blair has learnt so much whilst he's not been in the front line of politics about how to run a huge digital data set infrastructure. Maybe, I mean, we're all sort of laughing as we're saying it. I'm trying to be generous to him. In some way, you know, when we saw Tony Blair on stage this week, it was a reminder, wasn't it, of what an amazing communicator he is and how convincing his sales technique is. He's just worlds apart from the communication we see from Sir Keir Starmer, for example.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And that's the thing. Tony Blair can be really quite hypnotizing when he speaks. And I've no doubt that he really does believe in what he says. You know, he believes his way is right. His dangerous globalist philosophy is the way forward. I obviously disagree with that completely. But, you know, in my view, it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter whether it's Tony Blair or Keir Starmer. These are policies that are coming down the line anyway. The Conservatives would have probably enacted them sooner or later, especially in relation to AI and data, because that is the direction our society is going in. It probably just would have been a bit watered down, essentially. But people like Tony Blair are dangerous, yes, but they're always going to have their influence. They've got enough money too, which is sort of what Aaron said.
This issue of this control of the state, putting your medical records all in one place, people will be listening and go, well, what's the problem with that, Bev? Why is that a problem? It might be really convenient, and you do go to the hospital and they can't access notes that your GP has had. Maybe there is some utility here. I think one of the things I found most chilling, Aaron, was when he talked about being able to see these records and therefore enact preemptive treatment. So working out the AI, working out the profile of that person, what you're most likely to get, and therefore treating you before you've even got something. Again, there'll be those people who say, well, that's sensible. What's your problem?
Well, we're already seeing something actually like that happening. There's been a trial of something called it's effectively, you might call it a liquid biopsy in later life, but in early life, basically you have a newborn child, they have a small blood sample taken away, they have their entire genome sequence, and there's potential health issues or sensitivities that can be pulled up really early. Now, I think with a newborn child, that's a very smart thing to do, personally. But like you say, no, but so for instance, you know, there might be a condition that is really important, and you're going to avoid, you know, early years or early months mortality, infant mortality. But I would agree, you don't want a newborn child coming into the world, and then you have a doctor saying, "Yep, there's a 65% chance they're going to need a mastectomy by the time they're 55." That is quite dystopian. So again, we need a broader conversation around this stuff. And I personally don't think that think tanks who are funded by people with a massive vested interest in this stuff being implemented wholesale, I don't think that's the best place to do it, personally.
Dominique?
No, I completely agree with everything he said, really. And I think the dangerous part about that, especially in regards to health, is it takes away an individual's agency to actually decide what's best for their health as well. Because we live in a society, as you said, where people are genuinely programmed to believe that they don't know what's best for them. And that's a really important point that I want to make. We are programmed to believe we do not know what's best for us. We're programmed to believe that government and people like Tony Blair know what's best for us. And that's why some people might be accepting towards policies like this. But the reality is we know what's best for us as individuals. And whether it's AI, whether it's government, whether it's politicians, everything they say and push upon us should be taken with an extremely large pinch of salt, in my view.
Yeah, well, Tony Blair is back to stay. He ain't going anywhere, and no doubt we will be analysing his ambitions throughout the next few years, if not months, if not years. Right, Dominique, Aaron, thank you so much for kicking us off this evening. Right, after the break. Labour have said that they plan to reinstate VAT on private school fees. Is it a straightforward and sensible way to ease the state school funding crisis, or an unfair and divisive policy, particularly punishing those who want to send their kids to private school? You're watching The Neil Oliver Show on GB News with me, Bev. Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show with me, Bev Turner, this evening. Now, one policy that Labour were very vocal about prior to the election was their intention to slap 20% VAT on private school fees. They claim that this would raise £1.3 billion, which would fund 6,500 new teachers. But does it feel to you like a cruel and vindictive policy designed to divide? Well, joining me to discuss this, our education expert Tom Buick and political commentator Aaron Bastani is still with me. Aaron, let's start with you. It felt a little bit to me like the mask slipped with Labour when they were so wedded to this idea from the start. 1.3 billion sounds like a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. It isn't a huge amount. But the people that will be targeted by this will be those children who are at private school, who then have to move and change their whole life, those kids, to move into a state school because their parents can't afford to keep them there. And yet everybody that I've spoken to from Labour is totally unmoved by that prospect.
Well, I think they probably are moved because they look at this through a sort of utilitarian lens, and they would say, well, that might be a little bit bad, but this other thing, which is really bad, needs to be addressed, and that's our political priority, which is the condition of state schools in this country. The question is, of course, how much money is it going to raise? If this raised 2 billion, which is the top number, I think you'd have far fewer sceptics. Some people are saying, well, actually, you'll have people move into the state system, ergo, you're going to raise less tax, you're going to have to spend more because more people in the state system, etc. So where are we? If it doesn't raise anything, you're going to have a lot more critics. Let's say it's somewhere in the region of, like you say, around about $1 billion. My personal view is these are private businesses. So A, they should pay VAT, but secondly, they can adapt. You know, if you talk to people actually in the private school sector, they say the money now, the growth market is overseas students. That's where all the money is coming from. Okay, well, raise the fees on those guys then. Have a different fee setup for domestic students, UK nationals, and kids from overseas. You are businesses, you're going to have to innovate in terms of covering your cost base and providing an affordable product to consumers. We say that with regards to every other business. Why can't we say it here? So I think it's a sensible way to proceed. Look at it for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I think you have to work in partnership with the entire education system, private and public, and reassess. But I personally think on principle, if you're a private business selling goods and services in the private market for prices, you should pay VAT.
But those overseas students, so you're talking specifically about boarding schools there? Is that what you mean? So kids who...
Overwhelmingly, yeah.
Kids who are sent over from Dubai, the parents live in Dubai, Hong Kong, wherever, they send their children to boarding school here, commonly, and you think they should be charged more because they aren't living here?
Well, I don't know, but I would say on an ad hoc, basis, I think these are businesses. I think many will be able to absorb the cost. Some are going to struggle to absorb the cost, right? And I think that's what we're going to work out over the next several years. Some are going to struggle to cost. Many of them won't, of course. Many of them are very profitable. They're very well run. But like I say, these are private businesses. And normally when we have any sort of industrial sector and we have businesses which are struggling, we say, well, the market will decide. There might be consolidation, they might make cost savings, they might introduce new innovations, and that's going to lead to higher productivity. That's generally the mindset we have with the private sector with market systems.
Tom,
and I don't see why it's not the case here.
Tom, you're an education expert. What do you think the real world implications of this are going to be for the education system?
Hi, Bev. Look, first of all, I agree that the state education sector needs more resources. We're spending 8% less on education than we were in 2010. And actually, if you look back through history, and I just completed a book on the history of education, actually, over the last 150 years, it was the Labour government of James Callaghan that spent more on education as a proportion of our national wealth than any government since. And I think this policy actually is politically wrong-headed, and really for three reasons. The first, it's actually quite a performative policy in the sense that it gives voters the impression that by whacking a tax, which I believe is a double tax actually, on education, on private education, that this money will be then redistributed in a very progressive socialist way to the state sector in order to pay for new teachers that we need, and importantly for the breakfast clubs that we need in our deprived areas. But I think, as Aaron was just saying there, tops this will raise about £1.9 billion is the figure that Bridget Phillipson gave to a House of Lords Select Committee. Actually, the governments before the current government came in, but under the last government, officials said it would only raise £900 million. But the point is, there will be displacement from the private sector into the state sector. So it's performative from that point of view. It's a double tax in that, again, Aaron says, well, these are private businesses. Actually, most are incorporated as charities, and charities don't pay on a lot of these kind of services that they deliver as part of their charitable objects. And one of the things I'm worried about, someone that's been a CEO of several charities over the years, is that this is going to open a whole Pandora's box where actually charities are going to have to start charging VAT on more of the things that they offer for public good. And just finally, why actually this is a wrong-headed policy politically, it does nothing about the class ceiling in our country. The permanent secretaries of Whitehall, 60% of them went to private schools. 65% of our judges went to private schools. Where in this policy is the progressive nature that will actually lead to a redistribution of opportunity and not just going on a raid of middle-class parents who can afford to send their kids to private schools?
It's such a good point, Aaron, because the billionaires who can afford to send their children to private school, the multi-millionaires, they will not be touched by this 20% VAT. So what you're going to get is those parents who often have help from grandparents as well. Now, the doctors, the lawyers, the professions, if you like, who have spoken to granny and granddad and they've said, you know what, we're not going to leave you so much in our will, but we want to put this into the kids' education now. Those families are the ones who are going to be hit by this. It's almost like if it's not broken, don't fix it. This sort of two-tier system is ideologically, of course, fundamentally. Of course, it's sort of wrong in inverted commas that you can pay to give your child an advantage in life. If I had my way, I'd wave a magic wand, close all the private schools, but raise the standard beautifully of all the state schools. Wouldn't that be a utopia that we could live in, where they all had football pitches and swimming pools and, you know, amazing after-school care? That's not the real world we live in, unfortunately. So how are we going to encourage, as Tom was saying, this idea of social mobility with those sort of middle class, if you like, the lower middle classes who are trying to scrimp and save to get their kids to school? Those are the ones that are going to be ending up just feeling like there's nothing to aspire to.
Well, we already have a very rigged school system in this country. We got rid of grammar schools a long time ago in many places, not all of them, but many places. And what we have instead is selection, not by the 11 plus, but by where you live. We have a postcode lottery. So if you live in a nice middle class neighbourhood, you tend to have really nice schools. And if you live in a poorer neighbourhood, you have poor schools. And that is deeply unfair and deeply unjust. And it's an outcome of education reforms over the last 50, 60 years, which people didn't expect or foresee. And I totally buy that critique. But like I say, the middle class in terms of those state schools generally gets a decent deal. In terms of the people that can't afford to stay on with regards to these particular institutions, again, I understand, but the point is, what other private enterprise doesn't have to pay VAT? Now, some people say education is a public good, it's very useful. I mean, so is renovating a house. There are lots of public service. So is feeding somebody, right? Tesco does stuff which is really useful for us. It means that when you go out, you can buy bread and eggs and milk. That's really socially useful. If we didn't have that network of logistics and food distribution, we'd be in trouble pretty quick. But we pay VAT on it. So I just as a purely, it's not about even necessarily, you don't have to go to fairness. You don't have to go to all those places. You should just say it's a business. There's prices involved, there's a market system, it's voluntary. Why aren't they paying VAT? Personally, I would actually introduce VAT on everything except food. That includes books, printed matter, kids' clothes, people might get upset, and I would bring it down. I think ideally VAT should be lower than it is, but the fact is, you have something which is a for-profit market system, which is private schools, there should be VAT.
Doesn't this raise the issue, Tom, though, about the role of how much we value children? Because Aaron sounds a little like the child catcher there from Chitty Bang Bang. Like, he wants to tax kids' clothes, he doesn't care where they go to school, and it's just as useful if you're selling food in Tesco's. Isn't the point that children are important? The next generation are critically important, and their well-being. Maybe we've lost sight of that as a society.
I think we have, and I think Aaron, frankly, has lost sight of that as well, as someone that I would consider he and I are both on the same sort of left-leaning side of progress. VAT is one of the most regressive taxes there is on poor and middle-income people. You've only got to talk to any standard economist and they'll tell you that. But just coming back actually to a really important point Aaron made about what would be a progressive education policy then in the state sector. He mentioned house prices. It's why, for example, if Labour was really being true to its roots, like, for example, Anthony Crosland's famous 1065 circular, when he was Education Secretary, that began that process of dismantling the segregation of the 1944 Education Act. That's why we got comprehensive education. We only have about 165 grammar schools left in the country. Why doesn't a Labour government put a levy on house prices? Why doesn't a Labour government, for example, say to aspiring working class parents living often in peripheral housing estates across the country, therefore they tend to get trapped in catchment areas where the schools are not always, for example, rated good or outstanding? Why doesn't it give those working class kids a break and say to those parents, you can send your kids to any school, including any outstanding school that might be within
It's a very good point.
City area.
It's a very good point. The clock has beaten us, unfortunately, but fascinating. Thank you so much, Tom Buick, Aaron Bastani. Big issue that. Thank you. Now, after the break, world record-setting explorer Ash Dykes is about to undertake his toughest, most dangerous challenge yet. And he's going to be right here on the sofa to tell us all about it. Don't go anywhere. Back to the Neil Oliver Show with me, Bev Turner. Now, Ash Dykes is an explorer, extreme athlete and motivational speaker who's already trekked from west to east Mongolia, become the first person ever to hike the length of Madagascar, and became the first person ever to trek along the Yangtze, Asia's longest river. However, his latest record attempt may be his most daring and dangerous yet. Have a look.
I'm Ash Dykes. For over a decade, I've completed some of the world's toughest expeditions in some of the harshest and most remote environments on this planet.
You've achieved a world first.
And despite some parts of the world being overcrowded,
hundreds of climbers all queuing to get to the peak of Mount Everest,
there are still places nobody has been to. Some places so wild, even the animals don't know what a human is. Some places so inaccessible, helicopters are the only route in.
Oh, Ash, I'm so excited to talk to you. He's with me in the studio now. I was gripped to that. Right, give us a bit of a backstory, because you are amazing and the things you've done are amazing.
That. Or just crazy.
Yeah, possibly. We'll come on to that.
Yeah.
But obviously, people know of Bear Grylls is the main sort of adventurer. There are a few kind of who've broken through to the mainstream kind of household names.
Yep.
You're still a little unknown, forgive me.
Yeah.
That I think will probably all change very soon. But where do you see yourself kind of in the pecking order of elite athletes around the world?
Oh, would it be...
Endurance athletes is what I meant to say.
Yeah, endurance athletes. I would say I would put... My name's not up there, but my achievements sit at the top in a non-blowing smoke up my
That
backside.
is what I was getting at, really. Yeah,
Right.
Go on. So...
Just because I set off, so I was only 19 when I started. I was working fish and chip shop, lifeguarding, waiting on, raising as much money as I could. And all of the rest of the students in college were going on to the military university. And I just wanted to get out there.
Where were you living then?
Wales.
Okay.
Old Colwyn, yeah.
What's that like there in that particular part of Wales?
It's a small, sleepy town. You know, no one really sort of makes it outside of Old Colwyn in a way. There's no one really to look up to or to aspire to. There's no good connections. But it's a beautiful part of the world, you know. You've got the sea, the mountains, the lakes, the rivers, all of that.
So were you always very outdoorsy then?
I was always very competitive and athletic. It was always sports. I'd play rugby, football, athletics, you name it. I was always sort of competing. And then it was sort of later, 16, 17, that I very much got involved with the outdoors, because I thought it sharpens you up physically and mentally, and you face a lot of adversity, and I think that's the best kind of way to learn.
Not an easy way to make a living, though. Like,
it's not.
Do you manage to get good financial support now?
I didn't for the first 5 years after Mongolia, first world record. I can tell you now, I made no more than 3K for a whole 12 months. I had to live with my parents. Same with Madagascar. It was a real struggle. The Yangtze River was what changed everything. It was like onto the Joe Rogan podcast. I had the book. We had National Geographic. Things sort of blew up. I started doing presenting all over the world, and then we produced another 6x 1 hour international TV show following the Great Wall of China, which not a lot of people know about because it's not a record.
You're big in China, aren't you?
Much bigger than the UK.
Don't you have some like special award for a person of special interest in China or something? It makes it sound like a statue. But you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. It was only last week. There's a few different awards out there, but it was only last week I returned after being appointed ambassador for Shaanxi province.
Yeah.
Which was really cool, you know. They really sort of got my back over there. And I'm trying to build it up here in the UK as well.
It's brilliant, and I'm sure you will. You've got such fantastic energy. Were you always like the kid that wouldn't sit still in the classroom and wanted to go out and run around the field?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I was always wanting to, you know, I couldn't sit still in a classroom and like listen to the teacher and their experiences and their stories. I needed to go out there, very much a kinesthetic learner, you know, learn from hands-on practical experience. And that's what travel was about.
And what are you doing next, Ash?
So the next one takes me to the greenest country in the world, Suriname. 94% of the country is just completely covered in jungle, and we will be attempting via helicopter to begin with to drop off in the Amazon. Might not be anywhere to land, so we'll lower the helicopter above deep waters and jump into the river, and then from that point we attempt to summit the highest and second highest mountain, sort of machete in hand, sort of hacking our way through the bush, hunting, gathering, and then we look to find and officially map the source of the Kopanam River and kayak from source to sea, which will be highly intense. A lot of your wildlife, your jaguars, your caiman, your piranha.
Oh, and when you say we, who is your team? Like, how many people do you have now to make something like that happen?
So it's just a small team of 4 of us going out there. It's myself, it's Jacob Hudson, who's producer. It is Dick Locke and Matthew Wallace, who are your logistics and wildlife experts, because there will literally be wildlife everywhere. You know, they are already in Suriname, they live out there, and even they're a little bit anxious as to where we're going and
what's your biggest danger?
I would say, you know, a lot of people think it's probably like the anaconda or the crocodiles, stingrays. I would probably say it's the falling trees, because when one falls, they're all connected via vines, and so it's kind of like a tsunami of trees. And every single night we're just hammock between the 2 trees, sleeping out in the jungle.
Are you single, Ash?
I'm not. I'm not. I've got a girlfriend who's going to be very worried at home.
I was going to say, what's the impact on your loved ones? I mean, is she very supportive?
She's very supportive, yeah. It's been 3.5 years, almost 4 years now. So she wasn't there for the Mongolia, Madagascar and the Yangtze, but she was there when I was in China for 4.5 months filming the Great War. And it was hard, you know, we missed each other, but she was kind of like rooting for me. She kind of knew what she was getting involved herself into, you know, with
And how long will you be away on this trip?
It's not a long one. It will be 40 to 50 days. And so it's not a massive sort of 352 day like the Yangtze one, but the intensity is ramped right up. Any wrong footing, any wrong mistake, we're going to have to be 100% focused effectively.
Will you have satellite phones?
Yes.
As long as they work.
Yeah, Viasat and Globalsat have sent satellite communications, so fingers crossed with this one, we want to live stream every step of the way.
And where can people see that? On YouTube?
Yeah, YouTube, my Instagram, TikTok. We're just going to try to get it out there.
Where do you charge stuff in the jungle?
We'll be taking solar panels. And so during the day, we'll probably take a good 2 hours where there's rocks hopefully by the side of the river. pull out the solar panels and charge power banks, electronics, and then, that should be good enough for an
And what will you eat?
Piranha will be the main source of protein.
Have you ever eaten a piranha?
I haven't. This will be the first. So it'll be piranha. We'll have beans and lentils, but the main source of protein will be from the fish of the river.
How easy is it to catch a piranha?
It's not as hard as you think.
Hands is all I know.
No, you don't. We'll be able to we'll take string with us.
Right.
And then we'll be able to use sort of bamboo, latch on the string at the end, find bait in the form of worm, and then just fish them up in the right area. That is
You're going to be, it's such an obvious and such a kind of a mum thing to say, but you're going to be exhausted, aren't you, when you finish this? How will you sleep? You said hammocks between the trees.
Hammocks between the trees, and the jungle's loud as well,
Oh, mozzies?
Yeah, everything.
That's going to be isn't it getting bitten malaria? Is that an issue over there?
And I did in Madagascar. I caught the deadliest strain of malaria, and I made it about 3 hours, the doctor predicts, before I potentially would have slipped into a coma. So I have faced that before. I faced dehydration. I've almost died. There's been endless, followed by a pack of wolves for 2 days, hunted by bears. It's so I think whilst it sounds reckless, I've built up so much experience since I was 19 years of age through really harsh environments, facing adversity, learning about myself, what I'm capable of, that I will be going out to Suriname with 100% awareness and focus.
So people will be sat at home now, sort of, maybe picking amongst the Quality Street on a Sunday evening and thinking, what can I do to give my life a little bit more interest and excitement? We can't do what you do, but what would your advice be to people who think, I just want to take myself out of my comfort zone, like you say, just do something a bit different?
Oh, you know what? It's endless. I think everyone looks to outside of the UK for good fun, but it's here on our doorstep, And this is all of the training that I've ever done for any expedition abroad has been done here in the UK, whether it's in the mountains, whether it's in the forest. It can be a day hike, it can be kayaking. We've got lots of white water, we've got the mountain biking. Just going for a run now is perfect as well.
Yeah, well, the weather's sort of, the weather stays kind to us at any point, that bother you. And you were once voted, I love this about you, Ash, the 7th coolest person in Wales. The 7th coolest.
It's not quite good enough, is it?
Who was the coolest person in Wales
Who
that
was
year?
the coolest? I think it was was it Chris Coleman? Chris Coleman.
Rugby player? Who's that?
Sorry, Welsh football manager.
Oh, no,
Chris Coleman, yeah. I thought it would have been Tom Jones, but he was 50th. I'm like, no, come
well,
on.
at least you're cooler than him. You're way cooler than him, Ash. It's such a pleasure to meet you, honestly.
Yeah, likewise.
And
thanks
good
for
luck.
having me.
And we'll put on social media where people can follow your journey and
appreciate that.
Support you. So well done. Amazing.
Thank you.
After the break, not long now until England's footballers take the field against Spain in the Euro 2024 final. Can Gareth Southgate's men finally come home with some silverware? We're going to be asking our reporter in Berlin. Don't go anywhere. Thank you for joining me on the Neil Oliver Show. It is me, Bev, with you this evening. Not long now. I know this show is exciting, but there is some more excitement to come tonight. Of course, England are going to be kicking off with Spain in the Euro 2024 final in just a little while. It's the first time England have reached a major final on foreign soil, which was a bit of a surprise to me. It could be their first significant piece of silverware since 1966. So can they do it? And would victory change all of our lives? I'm joined from Berlin by our reporter Chris Scudder to set the scene. Hello, Chris. Good to see you. Great to see you there. Hi. Right. Let's just go back first of all before we reflect on this upcoming match of what happened to get us to this place. Just remind us who we've beaten so far and what has our performance been like?
Not great in terms of style, but in terms of results, right on the money. That's why England are in the final. And if you ask any football fan, they'll tell you it doesn't matter what it looks like. If you win, you celebrate. For managers, if you lose, it's a pile on. If you win, you're a hero. The small margins. England so far started okay. They beat Serbia, then they drew their next 2 group matches. Still won the group, but there was a lot of criticism. Why are all these fantastic players, some of the, probably the best squad in the whole of this tournament, not been performing well, despite not losing games? But, that's the nature of it. If you improve as you go through, and England have certainly done that. Although little moments, little things that make you think, could this be England's day? The first of those came in the first knockout round when they were seconds away from being knocked out by little Slovakia, who many people gave no chance at all. And 80 seconds from the end, Jude Bellingham, England's star from Spain, from Real Madrid, with that incredible overhead kick, saved the day. Then Harry Kane won the game in extra time. Then it was the penalty shootout against the Dutch. England have been hopeless over the years at penalties, but they've started to turn it around with lots of preparation, lots of psychology. They won that. They scored all their penalties. They were fantastic against the Dutch. And then, of course, that was against the Swiss. And then it was the Dutch in the semi-final when we all had a heart attack, I think, when Holland scored so early on. But England saved themselves with an equaliser, controversial penalty, and then another little sign, perhaps, with another last-minute goal from Ollie Watkins, who was the substitute, came on. England won it by 2-1, and here they are playing in the final against Spain, who have been, in contrast, pretty much perfect all the way. They've beaten all the big teams: Croatia, Italy, Germany, France as well, who were the pre-tournament favourites. But they're up against the team now in England who are getting better and have got those stars. And psychologically, I think England are in a good place as we prepare for what is going to be a huge day.
It's been sort of, these matches have been interesting, haven't they, for these last minute, as you say, you're on the edge of your seat, and those sort of 90-odd minute goals. In your experience, Chris, you've had an esteemed career as a sports commentator and reporter. I can't remember a time when you've had so many matches decided in the last sort of 90 seconds of a game. Can you?
No, that's right. I mean, football's changing now. Since we've had VAR and the video referees and all that sort of stuff, you have ages now of added time. There used to be a few minutes. Now you sort of get about 10 sometimes. So it's, the game's never over till it's over. And I think, over the years, England have been weak mentally. I think we've always relied on the reputation. We're England, we'll never lose, and it always goes wrong. It's interesting. I was in Dortmund for the semi-final, and all my time of watching football over the years, I've never seen so many fans from one country descend on one place. Not far to drive from the Netherlands into Germany. But they were like England fans used to be. There's loads of us. We're bound to win. We've got all the support. And I was watching it in the old town, actually, when you couldn't find hardly any England fans. And I thought, I know what's going to happen here. We are going to win this game. Their expectation, it was a sort of assuming that because they had all this support, they were going to do it. And it just felt like England over the years. And as soon as we scored, you could see the blood draining out of their faces. And we're different now. We've got the mentality. It just feels like England's time after all the failures for so many years, the massive disappointments. Gareth Southgate, he's had a lot of luck with the way the draws have panned out. But now they've done a lot of mental preparation. I think that they've never been in a better place mentally, and there's a real togetherness about the squad now, which we've not had over the years, I don't think.
They've been criticised, Chris, haven't they, this England team, for playing it a little safe maybe in these matches and hanging back a bit. Do you think we'll see a different sort of England tonight? Will they just come out on the front foot right from the start?
No, is the answer to that. It's going to be the same, mate. Why would you change it? I mean, people are saying, Ollie Watkins scored that goal. He's got to start. No, he won't. It'll be the same, knowing they've got a very strong bench. Spain can have the pressure of having to perform because they're the great entertainers. They have been in this tournament. England haven't at all. They've got individuals who are capable of anything. Jude Bellingham, Phil Foden, Harry Kane, Cole Palmer, sub. Ollie Watkins, sub. It'll be the same pretty much, almost certainly. And that kind of collective belief. I mean, Gareth Southgate, I mean, he's been sort of very calm, almost like he knows.
Yeah.
I mean, they cut it so fine, didn't they, in that game when Bellingham saved them.
I mean,
they believe.
And I don't want to jinx it, Chris. I don't want to jinx it.
We don't.
But
None of us do.
It feels a little like at the moment in this country, we've had a summer of rain, nothing works, we're paying huge amounts of tax, we can't get anything treated on the NHS. But what boost would it mean to the country if we win this? And do you think it genuinely makes a difference to how we feel about where we live?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, football's always, sport in general is, we are the greatest sporting nation on earth because we invented most of them. Let's not forget that. And football's coming home is the song. I'll tell you what, and this is another thing that sort of makes me think, how sweet would it be to win the title in Germany? Go back when that song came out, Football's Coming Home, 1996. It was in England. We all thought we'd win it. And who won it? But the Germans. And the Germans were singing, they were taking the you-know-what out of England. Fußball's coming home, they sang. And that hurt a lot for the England supporters. Fußball's coming home. Well, the boot's on the other foot. The Germans are out. They've been booted out. The Dutch have gone. England are in Berlin. There's a massive amount of people here, around the city. It's a fabulous place.
Yeah.
And...
Great.
How sweet would it be? Oof, it'll be fantastic.
Well, it would be. Chris, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Chris Scudder there for GB News out in Berlin. Well, hopefully, I mean, for me at least, maybe it will be a better situation than the semi-final because where I was on that evening, as the whole of the village turned on to watch the football, we had an electric blowout, power surge, and all the TVs went off. And in the end, me and my daughters had to sit in the car with the radio on and listen to the football sat in the car like it was 1940s. Anyway, I hope you get to watch the match tonight if that's what you want to do. Otherwise, keep it to GB News because obviously it will be entertaining here as well. That is it for our TV hour. But please stay tuned for the brilliant Free Speech Nation. We've got some extra content online, including a discussion about the disappearance of Jay Slater and what on earth is going to happen regarding Joe Biden and the presidential race. Don't miss that. Neil will be back with you next week. Very good evening. Thank you for joining me for the second hour of the Neil Oliver Show, hosted by me, Bev Turner, this evening. So there is a chance to have a longer, more in-depth chat with my guests now. So coming up, we're going to be discussing the latest developments in the search for Jay Slater. This is the Lancashire teenager who's gone missing in Tenerife. We're going to then turn our attention across the Atlantic and ask what the Democrats can do about Joe Biden as calls grow for the president to pull out of the upcoming election. And we're going to ask if Donald Trump is set to take advantage of the apparent chaos within the Democrat camp. All that and much more on the second hour of the Neil Oliver Show. So let's start with the search for the missing 19-year-old Jay Slater, which is now entering its fourth week. Jay went to holiday, of course, to Tenerife with two friends, but was last seen on the 17th of June, having apparently set off on a walk back to his accommodation. Local police called off the search, but Slater's family have vowed to continue looking, and two people who are involved in this are further specialist investigator Di Davis, who led an investigation into the case of the missing Madeleine McCann, and also journalist Nick Pisa, who's recently returned from reporting on the case in Tenerife. Welcome to you both. Nick, let me start with you. I've spoken to you on GB News about this a few times now. So am I right in thinking you've left Tenerife now? Why is that? Do you feel you've done as much as you could do, Nick, out there?
Yes, basically in terms of reporting, we were out there, myself and my colleague, for 3 weeks and covered a vast area of that northwest corner of Tenerife, driving every day between by the Americas, where Jay was last seen, up to the mountains in Masca, where his mobile phone pinged for that last time on June the 17th. We spoke to various people, the people who own the B&B, the property manager who rented out the B&B, to witnesses in the bar who saw the two mystery British men that Jay was staying with after he drove from that nightclub in Playa des Americas. We've spoken to the family, we've spoken to volunteers, so I think we covered the story as extensively as we could. Obviously, we are now almost a month on, still no clear as to what has happened to Jay.
Do you have any sort of gut instinct yourself, Nick, having been out there and, as you say, spoken to all these people?
Well, to be honest, I'm keeping a bit of an open mind, and also just my opinion varies, or my view varies from day to day, bearing in mind on what you discover or what you learn from speaking to people. I mean, I just find it hard 1 minute to believe that Jay would leave that nightclub willingly, as he says, to go to Masca, which is about an hour away from where his hotel was. He had a room in a hotel in Los Cristianos, which is literally 10 minutes from the nightclub. He goes off with these two guys up to Masca. It's an hour away. You know, I just find that really hard to believe. And then they say that a witness says that she saw him walking up the hill in the wrong direction. Why on earth was he going in the wrong direction? He should have been walking down the hill. And then you hear that his mobile phone pinged from that area in that Barranca de Juan Lopez, which is up in the Masca Valley. And where the phone pinged, it is such a vast area of undergrowth of cactus that you think, how on earth did he even cross there without using some sort of machete to chop through it, which is what some former British Army vet who we went up to that area has told us. You think, well, was the phone thrown there? It's just so many ifs, buts, when, why, how, and I think to this moment, up until now, we just still have no clearer picture as to what's happened. And obviously the Spanish are keeping their cards very close to their chest. I think we know for certain, we can say for certain, that Jay's family, who I've spoken to numerous occasions, his father Warren and his brother Zach, who are up there and crisscrossed that valley so many times, they are now firmly of the belief that he's not there and that he's possibly somewhere else.
It's baffling, isn't it, Di Davis, when you look at this case? It's very gripping, because he does appear to have disappeared into thin air, this poor young lad on his first holiday without his family. With your experience of having investigated the Madeleine McCann case so closely, what's your instinct telling you, Di?
Well, my instinct tells me don't jump to any conclusions. And Nick has been out there, and I know Nick is a very seasoned journalist, and I have talked to him earlier today, ironically. So I have huge respect for what he is saying. What I hope, and the Spanish authorities are not particularly like us, they don't have regular press conferences, they don't tell you their strategy, but I hope the senior investigating officer, in whatever shape they have given one, has a clear directive to those. And what you would do is to break it down into a variety of different strategies. The search one, obviously, but before that, you would investigate this young man, his friends, his family, his background, what we know about him. And then you would be looking at the various places, including the Airbnb. You'd be looking at the nightclub. And then you'd look at any aspect which would give you a clue as to a young man of 19 would go off with, as I understand it, two strangers, an hour's drive away, having spent some time there. You obviously have to look at the antecedents of those men and their correlation to the drug scene. And I'm not implying anything by that. I'm merely saying it is an area where I would be looking at. So there's a variety of different actions which you would get your subordinates to do.
Yeah, Nick, you say you're not convinced that Jay even went to that Airbnb property with those two gentlemen, but he Snapchatted a photo of him, or, well, we presume it was him.
I don't know. No, sorry. I don't doubt that he was there. I'm sure he was there. I'm saying his phone last pinged up the road in the Barranca Juan Lopez, which is about half an hour up the road. But what I'm saying there, that phone pinged in such a remote area, and as I say, in an area covered with cactus bushes and with no clear path. Again, this is where I'm querying in my own mind as well. If he did that road, which they say he did, why on earth come off the road and walk down Well, you can't walk down, Beth, is what I'm saying. It's just impossible. There is a path. Granted, there is a path, but it peters out and it just disappears into undergrowth.
But if the phone has pinged from that difficult to access location, but there is no phone there now, that would tell you that the phone was thrown there. It received this satellite signal that's where we know it was, but somebody then took that phone away. That feels unlikely.
Yeah. Well, they've searched that area. They found no phone, and we should say that the Guardia Civil, the Spanish police, seemed to focus the whole 2 weeks or the 13 days after he disappeared on that barranca, on that valley. As I say, about an hour from Playa de America. So they obviously must have had decent intelligence to suggest he was in there, but they gave it a good 13 days. I saw them up there walking through it, had drones up, had helicopters up, had dogs up, but they have now decided to stop that search. And I think crucially, they're also saying that the investigation remains open and avenues are being followed. Although, just to quickly say that the two guys who they were with, I managed to track down one of them. As Di said, we're not suggesting they were in any way involved. Does have previous convictions, which is known about, and he's admitted that, and that's on the record. But he insists that Jay arrived at that Airbnb alive, and he left that Airbnb alive.
Di, is this the sort of case that you would want to get to grips with as well? I mean, you'd think your natural curiosity would mean this is a rather sort of enticing scenario for you to do a deep dig into.
Well, yes, I would love to, but my days of investigation are well over by now. And there are far too many armchair detectives, as we know, including a number of ex-constables who are now experts in everything. So with great respect to them and others, I'd leave it to the authorities who are professional. The Guardia Civil are a modern force. They are semi-military. They're structured, they're disciplined. And I would let them get on. I mean, again, there's a British consul there. I wonder what they're trying to do. And, of course, the family need to know some information. Here in Britain, you would have a family liaison officer, and I don't think they've been appointed a family liaison officer. And the whole point of that is to keep the family up to date.
Yeah.
Who clearly are doing everything to try and find this young man.
Yeah, OK. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Go on, Nick, just briefly.
I was just picking up on Di's point. Di's absolutely right there. There would be a family liaison officer. And I think the problem we have here is that the language barriers is obviously an issue here. And I've spoken to the family and they say they are being kept in the dark. They're not being informed of anything at all. They're not getting any updates. And we should also bring up as well that Lancashire Police, right at the very beginning of this investigation, back in that first week, excuse me, they did offer their assistance to the Spanish police, but that offer was turned down by the Guardia Civil, saying that they had enough resources. OK, well, we could talk to you for much longer, fellas, unfortunately, but we've run out of time. Nick Pisa, Di Davis, thank you so much. Awful and really worrying, obviously, the family. I just don't know how they could, be getting through the day at the moment. Next on the show, the Republican former ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell, will be here to tell us what a second Donald Trump presidency might look like. See you shortly. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. So American politics continues to keep us gripped and entertained, mainly due to Joe Biden's seemingly precipitous cognitive decline. But for the Republicans, is it better to keep Sleepy Joe in office or replace him? Well, I'm delighted to say we're now joined by Richard Grenell, who served as acting director of national intelligence in President Donald Trump's cabinet in 2020 and previously as the United States ambassador to Germany. So Richard joins me now. Good evening to you. It is rumoured, Richard, that you will be in the running as the next Secretary of State should Trump win the election. Is that accurate and likely?
Well, I think that's what newsrooms are saying. But look, President Trump is focused on winning an election. He's not talking about who's going to be where. So that's just pure media speculation.
Okay, let's look at the state of Joe Biden, shall we? And the first debate with Trump, obviously, was terrible for Biden. He styled it out. He said that he was just tired, that he had a bad day. But this is getting increasingly embarrassing, isn't it, for the Democrats?
Look, I think I view this less as a partisan issue and more increasingly embarrassing for America. I'm quite concerned at what our enemies and others are going to do to try to take advantage of the situation. We in America don't know who is running the United States. We don't know if Joe Biden is going to bed at 6 or 7 o'clock at night. There have been reports that he doesn't like to work past a certain time. This is dangerous for America. And so we're demanding answers for the safety and security of America and for the free world. We are very concerned that he currently can't do the job, and let alone might try to run for office. I think that the democratic process, the primary process for the Democrats, put him there. They knew he was like this, but Democrat voters chose to nominate him anyway. So I think he's there to stay. He's their nominee, and they're clearly going to lose.
So just tell us here in the UK, what happens now in the run-up to the election? Because the clock is ticking for the Democrats to make a decision as who will actually be on the ballot if Biden steps aside, isn't it? And it's looking increasingly unlikely that he will voluntarily go. He may have to be pushed, but what happens then?
Well, first of all, let me just correct the record here. He's already been selected. We had a very long primary process in every single state, and the Democrats in every single state chose Joe Biden. He is the nominee. What you're talking about is whether or not a group of elites still have time to do a switcheroo. Can a group of elites come together and reject democracy and say, in a backroom deal, in a secret deal, we're somehow going to replace Joe, even though all of the Democrats in all of the states decided that he was their guy? There is nothing new that the media have revealed over the last month about Joe Biden. We've known he's been like this, but those of us who were talking about it 3 years ago saying he's in decline, we were mocked and called names, and we were told that we were conspiracy theorists. Well, reality is we were right. And yet now there's a panic within the elites in the Democratic Party because they see Joe Biden losing. So they're only talking about replacing him after the elections have taken place by the Democrats because they're losing. So should the elites be allowed to step in and overrule the people simply because they think they don't have a good shot? I don't think so. I think elections have consequences. We have to be able to tell people, you chose this guy. This is your nominee. You're going to the November elections with him.
Is that partly, though, Richard, because you would like him to be the nominee because he's much more easily beaten than perhaps somebody else stepping in? Although I don't know who that person would be. I mean, Kamala Harris's poll ratings are terrible as well. Who would the Republicans not want to see on that team? Who would be harder for you to beat than Joe Biden?
Well, first of all, let me just go back to how we started this conversation, where I said that I'm very concerned about America and our president. Nobody wants to have a weak president. So I believe that the evidence has been clear that he is very weak and he's not the best person to be leading the United States. I think that means now. I don't think he's the best person right now. I'm concerned about the weakness on the world stage. So what you're talking about, though, is the fact that the Democrat voter rejected what I think was obvious, and what the media now suddenly over the last 2 weeks think is obvious. But they wanted Joe Biden. They knew all of this last year. They voted for him this year. So they saw Joe Biden in his current form, and they voted for him. They wanted to take him into November. what we're now seeing is a group of elites try to take that over. It doesn't really matter what Republicans want.
But he could presumably step aside for health reasons if they said he's just not well. Then what happens? What do the Democrats do then? What would be most palatable to Democrat voters, do you think?
Well, first of all, if they decide that Joe Biden is not well and he can't serve as the nominee, then he can't serve as the president of the United States, and he needs to step down immediately. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And that's the calculus that the Democrats don't want to make. They want to pretend like he's fine enough to get us through next February, but he's not so fine to be in office in February. And that's troublesome. I mean, the people are watching this process. You know, the Democrats have talked a lot in America about undermining democracy. They are currently undermining the vote of the people by pretending that their vote doesn't matter and they're just going to come in and do some sort of elite switcheroo. So it really doesn't matter what Republicans think. What I believe is that in the Western world, we have to be very firm that your choices have consequences. You don't get to just change at the last minute and pretend like what you did doesn't matter. They have to live with this choice. And if for some reason Joe Biden steps down, then Kamala Harris is the president, and Kamala Harris would be the choice for the Democrats to stand in November. The problem with that is she's worse than Joe Biden. And so she's an amazing insurance policy for Joe Biden to not step down, because the Democrats know that they're in a real pickle.
Wouldn't they have an option, though, to change so that it wouldn't have to be Kamala on the ballot, that it could be Gretchen Whitmer, maybe the senator from Michigan? Or do they not have that option?
That's what you guys in the newsroom keep pushing. But let me just tell you the reality. The reality is now you're suggesting that you skip over Black women and Blacks because Kamala Harris is the vice president. She's been voted on as a national politician, as the vice president of the United States. So if you're going to open up this process, skip over Kamala, you're not just going to hand it to Gretchen Whitmer or to Gavin Newsom. I can give you about 13 other Democrats who are going to jump in, and they know that then it's messy. You can't hand it to somebody. This is a process in America that we have. You don't just pick someone to be the leader by a group of 6 or 7 insiders. We have to have elections, and I'm confident that my friends on the other side of the aisle, the Democrats, are going to demand that there be a full vetting, a full debate. That would take place at the convention in Chicago in August. And let me just add one thing. That would be utter chaos for them. Yeah.
Obviously, we've just got a new Prime Minister here in Sir Keir Starmer with the Labour Party. New Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. I don't know whether you're particularly familiar with the fact that David Lammy said some pretty unkind things, let's just be diplomatic, about President Trump. If Trump does go on to win in the autumn, how would you see the relations between America and the UK with our new administration?
Well, look, I think the relationship between America and the UK is really strong. It's not about one person on either side. It goes deep. We have a lot of friends in the UK, and we're always going to find a way. I don't know David Lammy. He's worked very hard to try to meet with all sorts of Republicans in America. I have not chosen to meet with him. I don't think it's appropriate. But, the reality is that we see the criticism. And that criticism doesn't just fall away. It's difficult for a relationship. And he has been brutal to President Trump. And so I think he sees the error of his ways. He's trying to make up for it. But I think it's going to be a difficult relationship in terms of his role. But it goes beyond any personality. It goes beyond President Trump. It goes beyond any one person. We have such a great special relationship with the UK.
Yeah.
And despite the fact that you chose to have your elections on July 4th, we still...
You've forgiven him for that. Okay, you've forgiven us. Richard, thank you so much for your time. Richard Grenell, nobody knows the Trump administration better than Richard. So thank you so much for your time. Now, coming up next, I will be continuing a discussion on the chaotic state of American politics with someone who's been called one of the most influential people in America for her efforts in promoting a society of opportunity and fairness. She's the CEO of Independent Women's Voices, Heather Higgins. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. I am not Neil Oliver. He's on his holiday. I am Bev Turner, of course, just here for 1 week. Now, we might have got our election out of the way, but the main event on the world stage, the Biden versus Trump showdown, is currently under doubt due to Biden's poor performance, of course, in that first debate. He has vowed to defy calls for him to step aside and let a younger candidate take on Trump in the election later this year, but he has not helped his cause with further gaffes. Here is how he introduced President Zelensky of Ukraine this week.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin.
It shouldn't be funny. You just can't help but laugh at that. And here he is introducing his own Vice President, Kamala Harris.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be Vice President, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there.
Well, that was him supposed to be introducing Kamala Harris and calling her Donald Trump. I'm joined now by Heather Higgins, the CEO of Independent Women's Voice. Heather was ranked recently as one of the most influential people in America. Good evening, Heather. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, it feels sort of wrong to laugh at the afflicted, but when you see Joe Biden make such extraordinary mistakes of calling Zelensky Putin and Kamala Harris Donald Trump, I mean, you can't help but laugh. We shouldn't be laughing at the president of America at a time like this.
No, and one is always sympathetic because we all confuse names. But what makes it funny is that in both of those instances, those were the singularly most inopportune names to substitute. At least you got the pronouns right. But this is a summer for popcorn, honestly.
Yeah.
Or whatever the British equivalent of popcorn is. We have had this extraordinary eye-opening in the United States. So our news over the last decade has become very siloed. And people on the right watch one set of stations and listen to one set of commentators. People on the left live in an entirely different news bubble. And what we saw with the debate was, while the people on the right were not at all surprised at Biden's performance, because if anything, he has been portrayed as even worse than he is in a lot of their media. People on the left, this was their first time seeing him unfiltered or without being told that that was just a cheap fake or things were being taken out of context. And so that's caused an enormous upheaval in the Democratic Party. There was just a report in the New York Times that $90 million of donor money in one of the main super PACs for President Biden has now been frozen by the various donors who are waiting and seeing. And you also have media which had been previously either been complicit and lying or unbelievably stupid and unobservant, now largely pushing to get him replaced. And it's fascinating to watch.
And George Clooney wrote an op-ed, didn't he, that was kind of, it made the press here. How big was that in America? Because he'd been very supportive of Joe Biden until recently.
Yes. So Clooney is very supportive of Biden. What we know is that Clooney had a fundraiser roughly a month ago, and 3 weeks before the debate or something. And what he's telling us now is that the Biden who was at the debate and therefore of questionable competence to be president was also the Biden who showed up at the fundraiser, whom Clooney was nonetheless continuing to support for president, which goes to show that for a lot of the people, maybe who even did know that this was going on, they were more interested in doing whatever it was that they thought they needed to win.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of Weekend at Bernie's or Tito, where you're propping him up and you're pretending that he's still fine because you're worried that you don't have another strategy to win. I'm sort of an outlier in my expectations of what is going to happen, but that, I think, is something that everybody agrees on, which is that a lot of people have been going along with Biden, whatever his state, because they thought that that was their best way to beat Trump.
What are your expectations? What are your expectations then, Heather, of what might happen?
So I did a piece back in February, and I've been saying this to different people for a while. I thought in 22 that in 23 we would start to see stories showing up in not just in the right-wing media, but in places like the Washington Post, suddenly validating the things that they had poo-pooed as nonsense, like that Hunter Biden's laptop was real and the contents of it were real, and that Biden actually had real problems. And yes, there really was a problem at the border with unfettered migration coming across. Because my view has been that there were people in the party who did not want Biden to be the nominee for 24, and that so there would be a double track of depressing his poll numbers while at the same time trying to lay the groundwork for an alternative. And I know that you had Rick Grinnell on. It's not up to the American people. The Democratic National Committee has its own set of rules. For those of your viewers who pay a lot of attention to Democratic politics in the United States, they'll remember that there are things like superdelegates in the Democratic Party, which the Republican Party doesn't have, so that they can override the vote. It's how Bernie Sanders did not make it through in the past. It's the capacity to cut people out of primaries like Bobby Kennedy, who should have been running as a Democrat. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So what the DNC has is rules that says that if it's an open convention, anyone who can get 300 delegate votes gets to be the nominee. Of course, Biden has got his delegates sewn up now, so he would have to release them. Or if Biden were to announce that he has decided that he does not wish to be the candidate for 2024, he will continue his presidency. He feels confident in that, but there are enough looming health issues that he feels that he should serve out his term. Then it is only up to the Democratic National Committee to decide on their own who the new replacement is.
Yeah.
And does not need to be deference to anybody else, not even anybody who's thrown their hat in the ring or even has political office. So it could be, they could say Oprah Winfrey. And my own view has been that there is a slight but real risk that what we're looking at is Michelle Obama. I
was going to say, and that could just be Michelle Obama, and I'd love to pick that up with you again another day, because we have been beaten by the clock, unfortunately. Thank you, Heather Higgins there. Now, thank you. Fascinating, isn't it? Right, that's it. I've been Bev, standing in for Neil Oliver. Thank you for joining me. I will be back on Britain's Newsroom on Monday morning, 9:30. Neil will be back next week.